Well, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining on your busy schedules. I know everyone is not just busy, but they're COVID busy right now. So I really appreciate you taking the time out just to spend a little time thinking about how we can love a little further, specifically our international students, if you have them. And if you don't, some of these resources I'm sure can be used for your American students as well. So I wanted to start off with, oh, let me back up there. There we go, with the Great Commandment, just to set the tone of loving a little further. I think this really sets the tone for us. So this comes from Matthew chapter 22. But when the Pharisees heard that he had silenced the Sadducees, they gathered together. And one of them, a lawyer, asked him a question to test him. Teacher, which is the great commandment in the law? And he said to him, You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the great and first commandment. And the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments depend all the law and the prophets. So I think, especially now, this very tried and true verse is needed more than ever. With our more nationalistic and kind of echo chambers that we experience on social media, understanding that our neighbor is deserving of love just as much as we are. And they're just people too, making it through this world. So here's how we can love a little further in the context of international education. So before we begin, I just want to make a note that I acknowledge I do not have 20 years of experience in the field of international education. So I ask for your patience and compassion as we move through. If you have a question and I don't know it, by gosh darn it, I'm going to look into it for you and we're going to find out together. And I'll make sure to get back to you. And in that same vein, this is one of my first such speaking engagements. So really looking for feedback at the end. Really welcome for constructive criticism. And then I acknowledge I am not an international student. I am not a person of color, nor am I an educator. So this is not me speaking on my high mountain of this is how you should be speaking to your international students, and here's how you need to be teaching them. That is not my intention at all. I'm here to help kind of give a sneak peek into what international students in the United States might be feeling right now. All right, so going back to my time in international education. So it first started off with working at, or not working, but being an undergraduate student myself at the University of Minnesota. And I promise there's a glow up here. But my first interaction with anyone other than that looked like myself was at college. And specifically, one of my good friends, Nancy El-Sabah, was an international student from Egypt. And she was the first one that I got to talk to who was Muslim and who wore a hijab. And I got to actually ask those questions and understand that there's a lot more that goes on behind those exterior features, like a great friend who we still keep in touch with. That led me to then become an RA for one of the living learning communities at University of Minnesota. It was called Students Crossing Borders then. It's now Global Gophers now. But it was a really unique program where an international student was paired up either with a domestic student or an international student. And so having to help navigate the conflicts and friendships that arose between these roommates is something that was very unique. And my RA partner, Imtiaz, is now doing biomedical science over on the East Coast, slaying it, but we still keep in contact over LinkedIn. So just seeing where these people go and where they came from and walking alongside them as they were in their educational journey is so fulfilling. And it wasn't even me doing it. And that led me to work at Central Boarding Academy, where I was their education and office coordinator. Central Boarding Academy is unique in that it is a boarding school setting for international middle and high school students. They attended local schools in the area, but then came back to our location to have tutoring for ACT, SAT, ESL, academic tutoring, and also, fun things like we had horseback riding and and other activities like that. You can see there I was also able to be a part of like parent-teacher conferences and college planning conferences. And it was a really unique experience where I was able to communicate with parents on a daily basis. And I'll tell you, one of the main questions I got from parents and teachers was, how can a parent send their student abroad at such a young age? And it just came from a complete space of disbelief. And I had to tell people often that it's not because they're trying to get rid of their student, of their child. No, not at all. It's because they're coming from such a place of love that they are trying to give their child the best foot forward in making sure that they're able to succeed as an adult. So their parenting plan extends much farther and they look more long term. And in fact, these are coming from, you know, not just the parents, but also their entire family unit making decisions on where students go and what they do. So it was a very connected group that we worked with. And that brings me here to Concordia, where I am International Admissions and Retention Coordinator. You could see there our Christmas card from last year, but just in terms of our student workers that we have, I get to interact with people from Egypt and from Korea and from Madagascar on a daily basis. And that is just amazing. So I'd like to figure out who's in our room here tonight, just so I know what your experience with international students are. So if you don't mind, maybe just raise a hand here. So I want to know, what level do you work with? Do you work with high school students? If so, just raise your hand. Okay. Oh, Juanita, are you middle school? Oh, I couldn't quite hear you. I'm sorry.
Elementary.
Elementary. Okay. Thank you. And so that's great. And then, do you have international students where you are? If you do, just raise your hand. Okay. And then, have you personally taught an international student? If you have, raise your hand. Okay. And then last question here, have you studied abroad before? If you have, raise your hand. All right. Okay. Thank you. That helps me just get to know you guys a little bit. So let's get to know our international students in the state of Wisconsin a little bit. So this comes from the Open Doors report. You can see here where our international students are coming from on a percentage scale. So far and away, international students in the state of Wisconsin are coming from China, and then next up India, and you can see our next top countries below that. Then if you're wondering, well, where in Wisconsin do they go for college? Obviously, University of Wisconsin-Madison, being a top-ranked university, brings in a lot of international students. They're one of the big reasons why we're ranked number 22 in the United States for the number of international students we have. But then you'll notice UW, Milwaukee, Marquette, and Concordia, we're all in that Milwaukee area. So there is a huge population of international students who may be going to your grocery store, who may be, you know, walking their dog. They may be right there, and you just need to say hi and get to know them a little bit. But what about high school students? Where do our international high school students come from? So this comes from Study in the States, and it is on a national level, not a state level, unfortunately. But you can see there are some similarities to the college numbers. China is definitely the largest sender of international high school students to the United States. And you can see down there, there are other substantial populations, but China far and away the largest. So as you might imagine, with all of the COVID implications of the origins of the virus, there and the tension that this has caused in our country, especially seen in the rise of Asian racism attacks in the country, that this may impact our Chinese international students and their families who are seeing these things on the television quite a bit. But it's not all negativity when it comes to international students. So Elspeth Jones, in her Problematizing and Reimagining the Notion of International Student Experience, came up with 4 major areas that international students bring in terms of their identity. And these are beautiful pieces of the puzzle of your institution that really color it, that give it depth, that give it difference, that are really to be valued. So let's go through those really quickly. One is personal, and that's things like their race, their gender, their religion. So being able to see someone different than you makes a big impact, right? If you're looking at a sea of faces and they all look very similar, having anyone that looks a little different is going to help color the picture of your university or your institution. Then we have their familial identity. This could be socioeconomic, social, kinship, and migration intentions. And I want to linger on this for just a moment. So students who are coming in, like I said before, some of them are coming in and their parents may be helping pay their full ride tuition, right? But some of them, and more of them, aren't in that same space. A lot of them are coming from places where it's not just the parents who have spent years saving up for their education. It's also their extended family, it's also neighbors, it's also, organizations that are supporting them. It might be an employer who is supporting their education in the United States. And those experiences of those 2 students, one who's fully funded and one who is, having this community behind them, is experiencing their education differently. Same thing for kinship, like I said. So more communal families are making decisions based on one, who of our children has the best chance and who is best suited for this education and where should they go. It's not just a student deciding, I want to go to Concordia. It's the family deciding and going through many layers to decide where is best for their student. Lastly, migration intentions. So for some students, they are coming here to the United States to get a great education and they are wanting to go straight home. For instance, we have some students who are wanting to go back to their home countries and continue on in their churches. But some are really focused on, I need to get a good job so that I can get my OPT, so that I can then go on and get my green card and apply for that. So they have, again, much longer term visions and planning that has gone into their educational career. That might have a different tone when they're in the classroom, right? That might be like, hey, I really need this. I'm going to be focused and you are not taking it as seriously and it's bothering me, right? For good reason, because they've spent years planning this. It's much more intentional than some of our domestic students. Then institutional. So when they're coming, what do they want to study? What are their post-graduation aspirations? For some, they want to go on for a doctoral degree. Again, that takes a lot more planning on the part of themselves and their families and their communities. And then also national dynamics. So the education system and the academic norms that they may be used to may be very different in the United States. For instance, some of our other countries that we work with for credential evaluations, instead of having a GPA that is determined by how they do in each course, participation grades, tests, exams, so each students try very hard in all of their assignments. Instead of doing that, they'll attend high school, but they'll take a national exam at the end, and that determines much more their viability into colleges and post-graduation institutions, much more than the GPA itself. So understanding for them coming here to the United States that, oh, I need to participate. Oh, I need to actually try on this homework assignment. That might be completely new to them. And then also language, of course, how could it not, right? Even for our English-speaking countries, their academic English may be very different. And also their idea of the slang words and vocabulary terms may be very different. But these are all differences that can be benefits as well to you as an institution and to you as a teacher of how do you, have a new perspective on all of these things and helps you reframe why do we do these things, right? So let's think about pre-COVID. Let's take a step back. So concerns that our students, both international and American, have pre-COVID, and I've just listed a few of them out here. And I acknowledge these are not all of them, and also that everything is on a sliding scale, right? For some students, this might be top of their list, some not at all, right? But if we think back to when we were in high school, for instance, just the amount of brain space all of these things took up was a lot. And again, this isn't even all of them. But now let's look at post-COVID, right? So all of these things have now shifted a little bit. So it's not just how can I be physically healthy by joining a sport? Now it's how can I be physically healthy when sports aren't happening, right? Or what are my post-graduation plans now that the college I want to go to is only having virtual classes? That makes everything more complicated, and our poor students are the ones doing this for the first time. They're kind of the guinea pigs of how do we do this. But that's not all, right? We also have now politics has become, a huge mainstay in the scope of 2020 and 2021. For some students, this is at the top of their priority list. This is something that they're really passionate about and engaged with. And takes up a lot of their brain space, right, in the classroom. And last but not least, COVID itself, of how the health and safety of their family and friends are, if they agree or disagree with things their parents or teachers are saying. All of this is going into making their school experience more heavy, right? Things that they're bringing with them into the classroom. It's not just, did I finish my homework assignment? It's, my family is refusing to wear a mask and I think we really should be. That's more pressure that they're bringing with them into that classroom. But now we think about international students, right? Because they have all of those and they have a few more that our domestic students just might not have. So first off is the language barrier. Now, keep in mind, if you were in an English class or a Spanish class, when you were in high school, it takes a lot of work and energy to be translating constantly, right? The more you do it, the easier it gets, for sure. But for our international students, they're doing this every day, all day, and it's not just what you're saying, it's what they're saying, what their friends are saying, what's on billboards. They're constantly doing this, and that takes up a huge amount of energy. When I was working with our international high school students, they would just come home tired. And I understand, all high school students come home tired some days, right? But add on that extra energy drain, and you can imagine how that might be for them. Even for those English-speaking countries too, right? Of slang is different. Wisconsin slang is different, right? What's a bubbler? Ha 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 for our East Coast and West Coast friends. But all of that is very draining, no matter where they're coming from. Then we also have racial bias. This may be the first time they're experiencing it at all. For some, this may be a time when they find out that they look different from others. They may come from very monocultural communities where now suddenly they're the minority, right? And especially, like I said, with all of the rise in anti-Asian racism things that are happening in our country, this relates directly to COVID too. And this may be the first time they're experiencing that. Then we also have just people in general, right? So for some introverts out there, going to a party can be just, you have to like mentally prepare yourself. And while you're there, you're like, I got to find the dog so I can have a moment of peace, maybe go to the bathroom for a little longer, right? But for our international students who are first here, if it's a host family they're with, or if it's a boarding system they're with, or if it's a dorm they're in, all of those new people and all of those new dynamics are brand new. And they're trying to figure it out while still being polite and respectful, and also keeping in touch with their family and friends back home, right? So now they have double load of connections they're trying to keep up with. And those connections back home are so vital, with them feeling connected, with them feeling grounded so they don't forget who they are, right? When you're homesick, you want to call home. And, for them, it's like, I want to just talk in Hindi for a second. So for those people, it's a lot more connections they need to keep up with. Then let's think about that new school system, right? Like I said, so we talked about grading system can be different for sure. The whole grading scale might be different, right? They're like, what the heck is an A? What the heck is a C? That doesn't sound like anything. But also ideas of plagiarism, maybe the first time they're interacting with this. For some countries where it's more communal, right? Plagiarism doesn't exist because it's just understood that ideas are a mix and flow between people. It's not so much ownership, it's more of sharing and collaboration. So for some students, they're like, wait, I don't understand why I was dinged on this paper. It doesn't make any sense to me. So really making the time to understand what plagiarism is and why we value not doing it in the United States needs to take a little extra time with your international students. Then also that new culture, right? Food is different, their fun is different, their TV shows are different, right? The Korean drama they're really used to watching and laughing about and connecting with friends over, no one's heard of, right? Or the food that they're used to having is just nowhere. And it's completely different here in the United States, right? Oftentimes our international students are like, that is way too sweet. How can you even eat that? Right? I can't even get it down. Or peanut butter, right? Peanut butter is a big one that they're like, we don't get it. So there's a lot that's just different, right? And then lastly, their parent worry. That's always in the back of their mind, and parents will be parents, right? They're checking in. How are you doing? Did you get home safe? Did you make friends so that you can walk home with them? And especially for international parents, how America views gun control is very different from how other countries view this topic. And it's the number one concern I talk about with parents when I'm meeting with them over Zoom. They're like, is it safe? Is it safe for my student to come here? And if we think about how it's been handled in our media and how it's just been blasted 24/7, not just on American media channels, but on international media channels, right? The storming of the Capitol, the how America's been handling COVID in terms of just numbers, right? We're coming up on, what is it, 500,000 deaths in America related to COVID. So the Pew Research Center actually found that many international people find that the United States has not done a great job of handling COVID. So if we look at all of these things that international students and their parents and their families and their friends are worried about before they send their dearly loved person here, we come up with some questions, right? In international recruitment right now, we're asking two main questions all the time. One is, how do we market our American school to students and parents right now, when that is what they're seeing, and that's been the reality for 2020, right, and 2021 coming in? And then secondly, how do we love and show our current students that we are not like what they're seeing on their television screens, in their newspapers, right? So these are the two big things that the International Center over here at Concordia has been working on. So I'd like to share with you a little bit of how we've been showing Christ's love to our international students and our domestic students. These can be ideas for you. They can spark something. I'm not saying you need to do all of these, but just, here's what we've been doing. So first, when the pandemic hit, many colleges, including Concordia, said, if you are able to, please go home and be with your family and be safe, right? But for some international students, they couldn't. They could not go home. There were no flights to get back home, or if there were, they were extremely overpriced, and parents were afraid to send their child on a flight during this early time of COVID when we didn't know exactly what was happening. Some universities said, we're sorry, we can't take that liability. You need to find off-campus housing. Concordia did not say that. We said, this is your home and we are not going to abandon you. And we are going to do the best we can to make sure you feel loved and you don't feel forgotten and you don't feel pushed away. So that was the case with our Tsinghua normal college students. So these are students from China. And how can you help some college students over the summer when campus is completely deserted and they can't go anywhere, feel a little bit more loved? So we did quite a few things. We did Easter meals and baskets for each one of them. We did craft tables that we had interchanging crafts that they could come and pick up. We had fruit. So in China, apples and bananas are not the norm for fruit. And in fact, they were like, this is very boring, but also we want more fruits and vegetables. So we would go off campus and wash and prepackage fruit that was a little more to their liking. Grab some toiletries, some outdoor equipment. We did weekly snack bags. And we did some more things. So we did take and bake pizzas where you can see everything is prepackaged and washed and everybody's wearing masks. National Bubble Tea Day, Boat Festival celebrations, you name it, we did it. Just to make them feel a little more like they weren't alone and they weren't forgotten. But they weren't the only ones we were taking care of over the time. So at the very beginning of COVID was Ramadan. And Ramadan is the largest Muslim celebration in the year. And we have a substantial Muslim population on our campus. Amanda Wrights, the Director of International Admissions and Recruitment, is also a huge baker. She loves to bake. And she made amazing, authentic foods that would be more to their taste, like I said. So it's not just, Skittles and Laffy Taffy. It's food that they would actually have at home that's a little more subtle to the American palate. So we packaged them all up safely. They got put in the back of my Jeep. And we went out and delivered about 20 care packages to our Muslim students for this big important holiday. You can see one student there put it on her social media and plated it very beautifully, better than I certainly could. But once classes started again, we didn't forget about our international students. We did little things. We did craft projects and caramel apples that were DIY and pumpkin spice tasting kits. But we also did bigger things too. So for our international students who were on campus, we reached out to each one of them, all of them. And if you remember from that previous slide, there's quite a few. We divided that name list between everybody in the Concordia International Center and said, if you want to, we want to meet. So those meetings were sometimes outside with masks on. You could see me there with Gian from Ecuador. Sometimes they were on Zoom, but each time we asked them, how are you doing? We want to know just how your academics are. We can talk about that. But how are you? What are you doing to stay healthy? How are you sleeping? And if needed, we would refer them to other services at the university like counseling or the Academic Resource Center to make sure that they were cared for. We also did Thanksgiving meals and Christmas meals for students who were on campus, made sure each student that was on campus for Christmas had a present underneath our tree in the Concordia International Center, and just a whole lot more. Now we've also been doing cultural hallway tables. So I don't know if you've been to the Concordia International Center, but we love to party. We love to have huge celebrations that are decked out, and we've really been missing them. But we've instead moved to more distanced tables that people can take and go. So you can see that whole list there of tables we've done. And I've actually want to point out, this is Bander from Saudi Arabia. His family actually grows dates, and they mailed a huge package of them over to him and his wife, May. And instead of having that taste of home that could have meant so much to them, instead they shared that with the university, and they were the talk of the town. In fact, they even gave a separate package to my husband, who also loves to bake, and we made some date cupcakes that we then reshared with people too. So just the love that is outpouring from our international students, even during this time, is so amazing and brightens our campus, definitely. We also did International Education Week, where we celebrated 25 different countries. And each of those countries had one or more food items that went along with them. So as you can imagine, that took a lot of planning, but my goodness, was it worth it. We're also doing a Global Perspectives lecture series. We've partnered with the School of Arts and Sciences, where we're going to do a different continent every month. So we've already done Africa, and later this evening, we are doing Latin America. And at all of these events, international students are welcome to share their country, things they want people to know about, things they love about their country, what it was like growing up there. So that's a little bit of how the International Center has been showing the love to our international students. But I just want to make note that these international students are the bridge between our countries. They're the ones who are going to go home and talk to their families and friends and say, you know, America isn't like what you're seeing on TV. I've made friends. I've made, connections with people. I've worked in America. I know what it's like. And they're the ones who are going to tell their children just what it means and why it's important to have that global perspective. So these are the people you're fighting for. So this is how you can love a little further in Kelsey's eyes, thinking back to that great commandment. So ask how their family is doing. You know, it's great to ask how they're doing, but how is their family doing and holding up with how their country is handling COVID, right? It's not just the United States that's suffering with COVID, the whole world is. So how is their family doing? Think about, the food is so important. You might have seen, we love food at the International Center. So what are they missing from home? What's that meal that they've just been thinking about, that they've been talking to their parents about, like, oh, remember when you make that? How can you, right? We live in such, wonderfully complex societies now. I'm guessing that there is a grocery store or a restaurant that would have something very close. And just a small note, don't say, how can you eat that, right? That is extreme. That's one of the worst things you can say to a student or anyone, right? Who's showing you that this is my favorite dish and it means so much to me. That's just sometimes a flip of the switch and we don't even think about it when we say it, but it really can make an impact. So just as a heads up, don't say that one. But also, thinking about if your student is going to a Christian school or if you attend church, that may be the first time that they are going into one of those places of worship. So explaining what to expect and how to act, when to stand up, when to sit down, when, if you do go up for communion, if you don't, that can make them feel a lot less anxious and more prepared for going into those settings. And then also maybe ask to go to one of their religious services if they are religious, showing that it's not just a one-way street, but you want to learn from them too. Break that stereotype that America is so American-centric, right? We do care and we do want to learn more about what they experience. So that's from me, but I also wanted to bring in a few resources here quickly from ACE, the American Council of Education, did a report. And here are some grounded tips from them on how to really support an international student population at your institution. So one is global concerns. So again, thinking about how the rest of the world or their country views some of the big global concerns that are facing our generation and our future generations. Can help you more align with where they're at. For instance, climate change, that can be a big one that other countries have a very different view of. Then think of responsiveness. So for many international students, they feel desired because they're bringing in international dollars, right? But they also feel unwanted because there's a rhetoric in America saying, don't take our jobs, right? When in the reality, those international students are the ones who are, making inventions and really pushing the fields towards greater and greater things. So making sure that you're saying, no, you are welcome. We do want you here, and we aren't afraid of you. Then address microaggressions or discrimination and racism as soon as they happen on your campus. Don't ignore. For some, that is just, having them be excluded from something or just walked past and not included in a group activity, making sure they're just included in that. Acknowledge the impact of national politics and policy. This is a big one, especially as we saw in 2020. And moving forward, the rhetoric around international education has certainly changed a lot. But if that is a policy or something that's going on that impacts your international students, make sure to make a public statement or tell your student, hey, this is how it affects you. This is what we're doing. And here's where we stand on that. You are still welcome here. We're not going to move you out. Also understanding for some of them that just something that they see in the news might not be happening in reality until much later. So the fear of I saw this tweet, right, that doesn't actually translate into policy and affect them just right at that moment. So understanding that things take a lot more time. And then if we move over to networks, so making sure that they have an inbuilt network, right? Because when they're coming here, they might feel very alone, right? So that might be an international club that's started, or specifically a Spanish club, or some sort of club they can join and where they're valued. Being assigned a buddy, an American buddy, is often very popular with institutions, and that's where they just have an assigned friend where they can go to ask those questions of where is the cafeteria? Where do I go to ask this? Where is the Walmart? Those can be questions that they can just like, I'm allowed to ask you questions. You've been assigned to me, and I already know that you're safe. You already have signed up for this, right? Also think of an alumni network of if we think back to our undergraduate or our high school careers, sometimes it's with great fondness of how then do you incorporate your international students into that alumni network. Humanism. So thinking of those international students are not just a student from China, right? They are a woman, a daughter, someone who may have a disability, someone who really loves to play the piano. They are more than just an international student from China. They bring so much more to your institution than just a number on a checklist of, yes, we have international. Also understanding that the difference between discrimination and tolerance and acceptance is vast. So someone being discriminated against, right, has, and they may experience all of these while they're here, right? So just being tolerated of like, yes, they're here. I'm just not going to sit by them at the lunch table versus, hey, please come sit by me at the lunch table. That makes a huge impact. And let me tell you, that student is going to tell their friends and their family about that interaction they had of, hey, mom, I was asked to sit at the lunch table and now I have a new friend and we're going to go shopping on Friday. You know, those make such a big impact in the actual lived experience of an international student. And then this is the last slide, I promise. So thinking about equity. So like I said before, we did have a huge number of full ride paying international students. Moving forward, that's going to be less and less the case. So if you want to have an international presence at your institution, making sure that you're financially able to support them if they need it, is going to be more and more of a factor in how many and if you have international students at your institution. And then lastly, in the classroom for our teachers here. So again, this is not me saying do these things. These are just ideas for you. But for some teachers, when they see that they have an international student on their roster for a class, might think a few things. One, oh gosh, they're not going to know any English, and I'm going to have to spend so much time explaining things after I've already taught them. Or it might be like, yes, I studied abroad in this country. I can't wait to talk to them about my favorite place and if they've been here, right? There's a huge wide array of opinions there. Acknowledge them, you know? If you're just going to say, no, 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 I don't feel that way, you're not going to actually address those concerns. So if you do have concerns, make sure to reach out. If there is a guidance counselor who can help you, if there's an ESL instructor, an English instructor, who might be able to give you some tips and tricks. But also know that what you're thinking might not be the reality at all. You know, they might have very good English, or their English might be to a place where they're very competent. And keep in mind, if you were in their shoes, right, in a completely different country, thinking about like, okay, I'm going to go into the classroom and the teacher is going to, you know, have this horrible mentality of me, how would you feel, right? That's the big thing of loving a little further, of just, put yourself in their shoes. Then, like I said, okay to ask questions, open door policies. So for some students, knowing that they can ask questions is completely foreign to them because it is rude in their culture, perhaps, to ask the teacher to repeat or to say, I didn't understand, because it's saying the teacher didn't do a good job. And that is extremely rude. So for them, they're not going to raise their hand. They're just going to say, yes, I understand. So just saying that, hey, if you didn't, come talk to me after class, or I have office hours on Tuesdays and Thursdays. That can really help. Also, if you're, having an international student and the topic of what you're teaching involves their country, make sure that you're not insulting their country or implying that they're the reason this horrible thing happened, right? Be very careful. And I would urge you before that class to ask the student, hey, we're going to be talking about this. I would love to have your perspective on how you view this, but don't pressure them to either, right? For some, they're like, I don't want to talk in front of class, right? Some are just not public speakers. And then lastly, it's not just you. It's not just you fighting the world of making your school more internationalized. This is a school-wide effort. So going to your administration and asking for international friendly policies. Having awards instituted like this organization does to recognize people and students perhaps that are really embodying what it means to love a little further. And also training stipends, right? So getting to know, how do I work with an ESL student? There's training for that. You just need to ask. All right, so I thought we could bookend with another Bible verse here. And people will come from east and west and from north and south and recline at table in the kingdom of God. So no matter where your student is coming from, no matter where they're going, they're here with you now. And that makes a big difference in where they might be going in their lives. Thanks so much.